Have you ever believed that a decade-long marriage is the safest haven to lean on? I did. Too. Until one fateful night when my husband, the man I loved more than anything, made an unthinkable proposal that completely changed everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and even myself. This is not just a story of betrayal but a journey to rediscovering oneself amidst unexpected challenges. Thank you for choosing to spend your time here and listening to my story. What you're about to hear is more than just an account of events, it's a reflection of love, trust, and the hidden challenges we never expect in marriage. Let's dive into the moment that changed everything. I remember it as vividly as if it had unfolded just yesterday. My husband Carter and I were settled in our snug living room. The kind of evening that wraps you in stillness, where the world outside seems muted, and the only sounds are the rhythmic crackle of the fireplace and the soft rustling of blankets as we adjusted ourselves for comfort. It was our haven, our sanctuary, a place that had witnessed 10 years of our shared life together. A decade of laughter that echoed against these walls, tears that softened them, and countless mundane moments in between that wove our story together. Carter wasn't just my husband, he was my best friend. My anchor in the storm. The partner I believed I could always lean on. But that night, something shifted. Carter looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. His features clouded by a strange, unplaceable emotion. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sorrow. It was different. Unsettling. He cleared his throat. The sound breaking the calm like a pebble dropped into a serene pond. "Honey, there's something I've been thinking about," he said. His voice steady, almost calculated. I straightened slightly, bracing myself. What could it be? I ran through the usual suspects in my mind: overdue bills, the stress of his job, maybe, just maybe, a surprise vacation. The idea was laughable. But hope has a funny way of sneaking in. Yet nothing could have prepared me for what he said next. "What would you think about spending time with someone else?" At first, I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. The phrase hung in the air like an unwelcome guest. I chuckled nervously, waiting for the punchline, the laugh that would ease my sudden tension. "Spending time? Like, with friends?" I asked, my voice tinged with forced humor. Carter shook his head, the seriousness in his eyes making my stomach tighten. "No," he replied, his tone measured but resolute. His gaze, which had been flitting about the room, finally locked onto mine. "I mean, what if you connected with another man? Just for one night?" My heart stopped for a beat. Surely, I'd misunderstood. This was Carter, the man who had once sulked for hours because a waiter lingered a little too long at our table, smiling as he handed me the dessert menu. Carter, who used to send me silly texts during his workday just to tell me he loved me. And now he was suggesting this. My face flushed with heat, a mix of confusion and embarrassment. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my words sharper than I'd intended. He leaned forward, his posture strangely calm, as if he'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in his head. "I've been reading about this thing couples do," he began. "Sometimes they invite someone else into their relationship to spice things up." The phrase hit me like a punch in the gut. Spice things up. My mind raced with 100 questions, each one louder than the last. Was he bored? Had I failed to make him happy? Was this some veiled admission that I wasn't enough for him anymore? Before I could process one thought, he continued. "There's this guy I know, Aiden. We work out at the same gym. I think he'd be perfect. Perfect. For what? My eyes widened, and I could feel the sting of hot tears threatening to spill. Aiden. The name wasn't unfamiliar. I'd seen him a few times when I'd picked Carter up from the gym, a tall, imposing figure with a natural charisma that seemed to command attention without effort. But this was beyond comprehension. Carter. Have you lost your mind? I snapped, my voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and fury. I stood abruptly, the blanket pooling at my feet, forgotten in the heat of the moment. This is insane. He didn't flinch. If anything, his calm demeanor only fueled my anger. Just think about it, he urged, his tone maddeningly reasonable. I wouldn't bring it up if I didn't think it could bring us closer. Closer. The word echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. How could something like this bring us closer? My thoughts spiraled, each one darker than the last. Did he even love me anymore? Or was this his way of opening a door he'd already started walking through? That night, sleep was a distant dream. I lay in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling as his words replayed in my mind like a broken record. A part of me was terrified of what this suggestion meant for us, for the life we'd built together. Was this the beginning of the end? Or was there something deeper at play? Something I couldn't yet understand. Days passed in a haze of awkward silence. Carter didn't bring it up again, but the suggestion lingered, an invisible presence in the room. Just as I began to convince myself that it had been a passing whim, a fleeting thought he'd discard with time, he blindsided me once more. One Saturday morning, as I sipped my coffee and tried to ease into the day, Carter announced, "Aiden's coming over for dinner tonight." My mug froze midair. What? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He's never had a proper home-cooked meal since moving here, Carter explained, his tone too cheerful, too casual. I thought it'd be nice to invite him over. No pressure. Of course. Just dinner. No pressure. The words felt like a challenge, a test I hadn't agreed to take. This wasn't just dinner. This was the start of something I wasn't ready for, something I wasn't sure I could ever be ready for. That evening, I found myself nervously chopping vegetables in the kitchen, hands moving mechanically while my mind raced. I was bracing myself for what promised to be an evening drenched in awkwardness. The doorbell chimed, sharp and clear, cutting through my spiraling thoughts. Moments later, Carter's booming, familiar laugh filled the space as he greeted Aiden with a warmth that sounded like they were long-lost brothers. Taking a deep breath, I wiped my hands on a towel and stepped out of the kitchen to greet our guest. The moment I saw him, I froze, my polite smile faltering. Aiden was even more striking up close than I had anticipated, tall and broad-shouldered, exuding a quiet confidence that was both magnetic and unsettling. His warm smile reached his kind, piercing eyes, and for just a moment, they lingered on me a heartbeat longer than they should have. "Hi," I managed, forcing my voice to sound light and casual, though my stomach churned with a strange mix of nerves and intrigue. "Pleasure to finally meet you," Aiden said smoothly, extending a hand. His voice was deep and rich, carrying an easy charm that made it impossible not to notice. When I took his hand, his grip was firm, steady, and lingered just enough to make me feel an odd spark, faint but undeniable. Dinner was, to my surprise, more enjoyable than I'd anticipated. Aiden turned out to be funny, charismatic, and effortlessly engaging. He shared stories about his work as a fitness trainer, his unexpected passion for cooking, a detail Carter had conveniently forgotten to mention, and his childhood growing up in a small southern town. His anecdotes were peppered with humor and warmth, drawing genuine laughter from me. Meanwhile, Carter was unusually quiet. His usual ease gave way to a focused intensity, his gaze flicking between Aiden and me like he was observing some unspoken interaction. I tried to brush it off, concentrating instead on being a good hostess. But the weight of his attention made my skin prickle. As the night went on, I couldn't help but notice how Aiden's gaze lingered on me. His compliments about my cooking felt a touch too personal, his questions about my hobbies surprisingly detailed, and his laughter at my jokes a little too enthusiastic. It wasn't overt, but it was enough to leave me questioning his intentions and my reactions. When Aiden finally left, Carter closed the door behind him, then turned to me with a knowing look that made my chest tighten. "He's a great guy, isn't he?" I crossed my arms, irritation flaring. "Don't start, Carter. It was just dinner." Carter's smile didn't waver. "You two got along really well. Do you see what I mean now? This doesn't have to be a bad thing." His words were infuriating, but what unsettled me more was the nagging flicker of truth in them. I glared at him, my voice rising. "Do you even hear yourself? You're practically pushing me toward another man." Carter sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm not pushing you toward anyone. I just want us to be happy, to explore something different. Aiden isn't a stranger anymore, he's someone we can trust." The weight of his words settled between us, heavy and oppressive. I didn't know what unnerved me more, Carter's persistence or the small, shameful part of me that wondered what it would feel like to color outside the carefully drawn lines of my life. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was simple but charged. "Thanks for the great dinner last night. Carter's lucky to have you." My heart stuttered as I stared at the screen. Why was Aiden texting me directly? And why did his words stir something in me? I told myself it was harmless, a polite thank you for the evening. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The message lingered in my mind all day, no matter how much I tried to dismiss it. It wasn't just the words, it was the way they made me feel. Flattered, noticed, like someone had seen me in a way I hadn't felt in years. I resisted replying at first, convincing myself it was better left unanswered. But by lunchtime, curiosity got the better of me, and I sent a brief response. "Thanks for coming over. Glad you enjoyed it." It was innocent, wasn't it? Just a friendly exchange. But when Aiden replied almost immediately with, "You're an amazing host. Can't wait to hang out again," a flicker of guilt sparked in my chest. Carter didn't know about these texts, and while I wasn't exactly hiding them, I wasn't eager to share them either. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. A door had been opened, one I wasn't sure I had the strength to close. A week later, Carter brought up Aiden again. This time, it happened while we were driving to the grocery store, the late afternoon sun casting golden streaks across the dashboard. "You know," he began casually, his tone too light to be accidental, "Aiden mentioned you guys had a good chat over dinner." My hands tightened around the steering wheel, the leather suddenly feeling rougher under my grip. I kept my gaze on the road, feigning nonchalance. "It was just small talk. Nothing important." I replied. My voice clipped. Carter nodded. But I could feel his eyes on me. His curiosity lingering in the air like an unspoken question. He said you're easy to talk to. Carter added after a pause. His tone unreadable. Thought that was nice. Whether he was fishing for something or simply trying to ease me into some bizarre idea of his, I couldn't tell. Either way, I wasn't about to take the bait. Later that week, Aiden's name appeared on my phone again. This time, his message wasn't just polite chit-chat. Hey, I'm trying out this new recipe tonight. Thought of you since you're such a great cook. Want the recipe? The question seemed harmless enough. So I said yes. What started as a simple exchange about ingredients quickly snowballed into a discussion about our favorite meals. Then segued into stories about his childhood. By the time I realized it, an hour had passed. The conversation flowing so effortlessly it felt disarming. I told myself it was innocent. Carter trusted Aiden. After all. And it wasn't like anything was happening. But then Aiden began slipping in comments that made me pause. Wish I could have a cook like you around all the time, he wrote one evening. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Was he flirting? Or was I overthinking it? The real shock came a few days later. Carter walked in after work, a grin plastered across his face, and handed me his phone. Aiden wants to invite us over for dinner this weekend, he announced, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. I hesitated as I read the text. It was friendly, straightforward, with nothing out of the ordinary. Yet, knowing the private conversations Aiden and I had been having, I couldn't ignore the faint pang of guilt. Do you want to go? Carter asked, his tone casual but expectant. I hesitated, searching for a response that wouldn't betray the swirl of emotions churning inside me. If I declined, it might make things awkward. But agreeing felt just as complicated. After a moment, I forced a smile. Sure. Why not? Saturday arrived. And Aiden's apartment was every bit as sleek and modern as I'd imagined, open spaces, high ceilings, and windows that framed the soft glow of the evening sky. He greeted us warmly, his smile lingering just a heartbeat too long when his eyes met mine. Dinner was exquisite. Aiden was just as talented in the kitchen as he'd claimed. But beneath the laughter and clinking of glasses, I couldn't shake the tension that pulsed through the room like an undercurrent. Each time his eyes found mine, it felt like he was trying to communicate something unspoken. Carter, oblivious to it all, seemed entirely at ease. He laughed, joked, and even suggested that Aiden and I team up to open a restaurant. You two would make a great team, he said, raising his glass in jest. Aiden mirrored the motion, his gaze fixed on me as he said, I'd like that. The words seemed innocent enough, but the weight behind them made my chest tighten. On the drive home, Carter couldn't stop raving about Aiden's cooking. He's such a great guy, he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. And he clearly likes you. My breath caught for a moment. What's that supposed to mean? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Carter laughed, brushing it off. Just that you two get along really well. Isn't that a good thing? I didn't answer, staring out the window instead, my thoughts racing. Part of me wanted to scream at him for being so naive, or was he? Was this all part of the plan he'd hinted at weeks ago? The next morning, my phone buzzed. Aiden's name lit up the screen. Had a great time last night. You looked stunning. By the way. I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. It was the first time he'd said something so blatantly flirtatious. A line had been crossed. And I knew it. I should have ignored it. Shut it down. Instead, I found myself typing back. Thanks. Aiden. Dinner was amazing. You're a fantastic cook. I told myself it was just a compliment. Nothing more. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. After that, our messages became more frequent. Inside jokes, little compliments, and anecdotes about our days wove a thread of familiarity between us. It wasn't physical, at least. Not yet, but emotionally. It felt like I was balancing on a tightrope. Each step taking me closer to a precipice I wasn't sure I could step back from. One crisp evening, as twilight gave way to night, Carter was out running errands, leaving the house unusually quiet. I was folding laundry, lost in my thoughts, when my phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up with Aiden's name. And for a fleeting moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity, or was it something more, got the better of me. I picked up, and the familiar warmth of his voice greeted me. I hope I'm not interrupting, he said. His tone smooth, carrying that disarming blend of charm and sincerity. No, not at all. I replied, though the sudden flutter in my stomach suggested otherwise. My hands felt unsteady as I held the phone, and I tried to mask the nervous energy coursing through me. We talked for nearly an hour, the conversation ebbing and flowing effortlessly. We touched on everything: work, childhood memories, books we loved, but beneath the surface, I felt a tension I couldn't quite name. By the time we hung up, my emotions were in turmoil. Exhilaration danced dangerously close to guilt, leaving me unsettled in ways I hadn't anticipated. When Carter came home later, he immediately sensed something was amiss. You okay? He asked, setting a bag of groceries on the counter. His brow furrowed with concern, the way it always did when he picked up on my moods. Yeah. Just tired, I said quickly, avoiding his eyes as I busied myself with rearranging a stack of magazines. Carter studied me for a moment longer than usual. You sure? You seem distracted. I'm fine, I insisted, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. He hesitated but eventually let it drop, though his lingering gaze made it clear he wasn't convinced. For all his quirks and the frustratingly eccentric ideas he sometimes entertained, Carter had a knack for caring in ways that felt genuine, if not always conventional. And yet, here I was, sharing conversations and moments of connection with someone I knew he wouldn't approve of. It wasn't just wrong, it was a betrayal of the trust we had painstakingly built. The next time Aiden came up in conversation, it was under circumstances far more disquieting. Carter and I were curled up on the couch, the glow of the television casting soft shadows across the room. Without warning, he turned to me with a strange expression, half thoughtful, half inscrutable. You know, he began, his voice calm. Aiden told me he thinks you're amazing. My heart skipped a beat. He said that. Carter nodded slowly, his gaze steady. He mentioned how much he admires your kindness, your humor. Said you have this way of making people feel comfortable, like they belong. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. My thoughts tangled in a chaotic mess of confusion and unease. Was Carter simply relaying a compliment? Or was there something deeper he wanted to convey? Before I could untangle the implications, he said something that left me reeling. "I think you should spend some time with him," he said. His voice unnervingly steady. "Just the two of you." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" Carter leaned back against the couch. His posture relaxed, though his eyes held an intensity that unnerved me. "I trust you. And I think it could be good for us. For you." For a moment, I thought he might be joking, testing me. Perhaps, but the seriousness in his tone told me otherwise. "Carter," I said, my voice trembling. "This isn't normal. Couples don't do this." "Some do," he countered, his gaze unwavering. "And it works for them. Makes them stronger." The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring me to reject the notion outright. I wanted to argue, to tell him how absurd it all was. But a small, insidious voice whispered in the back of my mind, "What if he's right?" The days that followed were a blur of restless thoughts and sleepless nights. Carter's suggestion had planted a seed of doubt in my mind. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't ignore it. But it wasn't just his words that haunted me, it was Aiden. His texts became more frequent, laced with a casual familiarity that felt anything but innocent. "Just made this amazing risotto," one message read, accompanied by a photo of a perfectly plated dish. "Wish you were here to try it." Another time, "Saw this book and thought of you. Isn't this exactly your kind of thing?" Each message chipped away at the barriers I was trying so desperately to maintain. And then, one evening, as I sat alone scrolling through my phone, Aiden sent a text that shattered any pretense of harmlessness. "I can't stop thinking about the way you smiled at dinner the other night. You light up a room in a way that's hard to ignore." My breath hitched as I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. This wasn't just crossing a line, it was obliterating it. I quickly typed out a response, "Aiden, I don't think this is appropriate." My thumb hovered over the send button. But before I could press it, Carter walked into the room. "Who are you texting?" he asked casually, his eyes flicking to my phone. "No one," I said too quickly, locking the screen and setting it face down on the coffee table. Carter raised an eyebrow but didn't push. Instead, he settled into the seat beside me and said, "Aiden mentioned he might stop by this weekend." I told him it was fine. My chest tightened. "Carter, this has gone too far." He turned to me, his expression calm but resolute. "Has it? Or are you just scared of what it could mean for us?" I stood abruptly, unable to stay seated under the weight of his scrutiny. "I'm not scared, I just don't understand why you think this is okay." Carter sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I want us to be happy. To explore possibilities we've never considered before. You said yourself things have felt routine." Routine? Sure. There were moments of monotony. But wasn't that part of life? Did it justify risking everything for some misguided experiment? As I stood there, the weight of his words pressing down on me, I realized I wasn't just fighting Carter's suggestion, I was fighting the part of me that was dangerously close to considering it. The tension between us had taken on a life of its own, lingering in every glance and every unsaid word. By the time the weekend arrived, I felt as though I were standing on the edge of a precipice, teetering precariously between the comforting weight of loyalty and the magnetic pull of temptation. Each passing moment only deepened my anxiety. And when Aiden arrived that Saturday, it felt as if the very air had thickened, pressing down on my chest. My nerves were frayed, And every fiber of my being screamed that this evening would change everything. Aidan greeted Carter with a casual warmth, his laugh carrying through the room as though nothing unusual lay beneath the surface. But when his gaze shifted to me, there was a difference, a subtle yet unmistakable softness in his smile. A quiet intensity that seemed to hold secrets only the two of us shared. The moment was fleeting, yet it set my heart racing in a way I couldn't ignore. Carter, ever the consummate host, seemed determined to ease the atmosphere. With a cheerful demeanor that bordered on obliviousness, or perhaps something more calculated, he insisted we all relax. As if orchestrating an unspoken arrangement, he encouraged Aidan and me to sit together on the couch while he busied himself in the kitchen. The sounds of clinking glasses and running water creating a soundtrack to my inner turmoil. Aidan leaned closer, his voice low and disarming. "You seem tense. Is everything okay?" Forcing a smile that felt brittle on my lips. I nodded quickly. "I'm fine," I replied, the words hollow even to my own ears. But I wasn't fine. Far from it. I was ensnared in a situation that felt increasingly unmanageable. A maze of emotions and decisions where every path seemed to lead to some kind of ruin. The weight of it all pressed on me, suffocating and relentless. When Carter finally emerged from the kitchen, he was carrying a bottle of wine, his expression one of serene contentment. "Let's make a toast," he said, pouring generous glasses for all three of us. His tone was light, almost playful, as though this were any other evening. As though nothing about this moment was fraught with the tension pulling at me from every direction. "To new experiences," he said, lifting his glass with a deliberate kind of ease. Aidan's gaze flickered toward mine, his lips curling into that enigmatic smile as he clinked his glass against mine. "To new experiences," he echoed, his voice layered with a meaning that sent a shiver down my spine. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and stilted conversation. Carter seemed unusually relaxed, almost unnervingly so, while I felt trapped beneath the weight of my own indecision. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer and feelings I didn't want to confront. By the time Aidan finally left, I was emotionally exhausted, my composure barely holding together. That night, as I lay beside Carter in the dark, the silence between us became unbearable. The words spilled out before I could stop them, my voice trembling under the weight of my fear and confusion. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered, my voice cracking. Carter turned toward me, his expression tender, his voice steady. "Because I love you," he said softly. "And I think this could bring us closer." Closer. The word echoed in my mind, a haunting refrain that twisted itself into my thoughts. How could something that felt so deeply, painfully wrong possibly bring us closer? Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the dim outlines of the room as I turned away from him. The gap between us in the bed felt both infinitesimal and insurmountable. Sleep eluded me that night, my mind caught in an endless loop of doubt and anguish. Carter's words replayed over and over, "I love you. And I think this could bring us closer." Closer to what? To understanding? To growth? Or to a disaster I couldn't yet fully comprehend? By the time dawn broke, I felt hollow, as though I had been wrung dry by the storm of emotions raging within me. The next morning, Carter went about his routine as though nothing had changed, brewing coffee and humming softly to himself while I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly into the distance. His casual chatter about the day ahead was jarring, a stark contrast to the chaos inside me. Then, as if fate weren't finished testing me, My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and froze. Good morning. Beautiful. Aiden's message read. I hope today brings you as much joy as you bring others. The word struck me like a blow. And my stomach twisted into a tight knot. This was too much. This was too far. Whatever this was, whatever we were inching toward, it had to stop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I began typing. Each letter feeling like a final thread snapping under pressure. Aiden. We need to talk. I wrote. My hands trembling. His reply came almost instantly. The speed of it only heightening my unease. Of course. When and where? I hesitated. The weight of the decision pressing heavily on me. Finally. I sent, today. Somewhere public. Coffee shop. As the message delivered, I exhaled shakily. The sound loud in the otherwise quiet kitchen. The day ahead loomed like a storm cloud. And I knew that whatever happened next, there would be no going back. We had agreed to meet that afternoon at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. A place where familiarity intertwined with anonymity. I had chosen not to tell Carter. Not because of guilt, but because the words to explain my reasons seemed to elude me. As though voicing them would somehow make everything unravel even further. When I arrived, Aiden was already there. Seated at a corner table by the window. The warm afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass, casting golden hues across the dark wood of the table. He noticed me immediately, standing as I approached. His smile both welcoming and disarming, the kind of smile that carried its own quiet gravity. Thank you for coming, he said. His voice steady and sincere as I took a seat across from him. His presence was calming yet charged. A contradiction that unsettled me. I nodded, drawing in a deep breath. My fingers toyed with the edge of the menu as I searched for the right words. Aiden. We need to talk. Really talk. He tilted his head slightly. His expression one of curiosity tinged with something I couldn't quite decipher. About what? You know what? My voice wavered. Barely above a whisper. The texts. The calls. This connection. It's starting to feel like something more than just friendly conversation. He leaned back in his chair. His posture relaxed but his gaze piercing. And what if it is? The air between us seemed to still. His words landed like a blow. Unexpected and unervingly direct. I had braced myself for denial. For an attempt to laugh it off as harmless banter. Instead, his candor left me momentarily speechless. I'm married. I said finally. The words catching in my throat. To a man who seems determined to push us together for reasons I can't begin to understand. Aiden's expression softened. The intensity in his eyes giving way to something gentler. I know, he said quietly. And I respect that. But I also know what I feel when I'm around you. And I think, no. I know, you feel it too. My pulse quickened. A chaotic rhythm that mirrored the whirlwind of emotions inside me. Anger. Confusion. And something else I was too afraid to name. Aiden. I can't do this. Whatever this is. It's not right. It's not fair, to Carter. To me. To you. He leaned forward then. His voice dropping to a low, earnest tone. I'm not asking you to do anything you're not ready for. But I need you to know that I'm here. For you. For whatever you need. His words were a double-edged sword. Both a comfort and a temptation. I hated how much they resonated. How deeply they seemed to cut through the walls I had tried so desperately to build. "What I need," I said, my voice steadier now, "is space. Please. Aiden. Don't text me anymore. Don't call. I need to figure this out, without you." He nodded, his expression clouded with a somber acceptance. "I understand." As I stood and walked away, I felt an odd mixture of relief and regret. Two opposing forces pulling at me in equal measure. I had drawn a line, but the weight of it pressed heavily on my chest. Would I be strong enough to keep it? Only time would tell. When I got home, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Carter was waiting for me in the living room, his arms crossed over his chest and an unsettling calm in his demeanor. "You met with him, didn't you?" he asked, his voice measured but firm. My heart sank. "How did you know?" "I saw the messages," he said simply. "And I wanted to see what you'd do." A wave of anger surged through me, hot and sharp. "You were testing me. Spying on me." Carter shook his head, his expression remaining calm, almost resigned. "I wasn't spying. I was trying to understand. And now I see that you're struggling as much as I am." "Struggling with what?" I snapped. "You're the one who started all this. You're the one who—" My words trailed off as I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes, a vulnerability I hadn't noticed before. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture that betrayed his own inner turmoil. "I wanted to shake things up," he admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "To break us out of this rut we've been stuck in. But maybe I went about it the wrong way." His confession hung in the air, heavy and raw. For the first time in months, the cracks in our relationship felt visible, tangible, and heartbreakingly real. "I love you," he said softly, his voice breaking just slightly. "And I just want us to be happy. Can you believe that?" I didn't know how to respond. The life we had built together suddenly felt so fragile, so distant from the reality we were now living. "Then stop pushing," I said finally, my voice trembling under the weight of my emotions. "Let me figure this out on my own." Carter nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging under the weight of everything left unsaid. "Okay," he murmured. "I'll back off. But please, don't shut me out." I turned away, unable to meet his gaze any longer. The ache in my chest felt unbearable, the kind of pain that only comes from loving someone deeply and not knowing if love alone would be enough to mend what was broken. The days that followed were some of the most challenging of my life. Carter kept his promise to give me space, but his presence lingered like a shadow that I couldn't shake. Every time I saw him, even in passing, the unspoken words between us felt heavier, like a weight pressing down on my chest. His eyes would linger on me, silently asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. The air between us was thick with tension, but beneath it all, there was still a faint flicker of connection, a memory of what we used to have. And then there was Aiden. Even though I had asked him not to contact me, his image and words refused to leave my mind. His voice echoed in my thoughts, a warm reminder of a time when I felt truly seen and understood. He had this way of making me feel alive, as though he could see parts of me I had long forgotten. I replayed our conversations in my head, overanalyzing every word, every glance, every moment. It was maddening, yet strangely comforting, a bittersweet escape from the uncertainty that clouded my marriage. One particularly lonely evening, I found myself curled up on the couch, scrolling through my phone in a futile attempt to distract myself. My thumb stopped suddenly when an old photo appeared on the screen. It was of Carter and me, taken during the early days of our marriage. We were laughing, our faces close, eyes sparkling with the kind of joy that only comes from love unburdened by life's complications. The memory hit me like a tidal wave, and tears began to blur my vision. How had we drifted so far from that moment? When had the laughter turned into silence and the spark into a dull flicker? That night, I barely slept. The questions churned in my mind, demanding answers I wasn't sure I could provide. By the time dawn broke, I had made a decision. I couldn't continue living in this limbo, torn between past and present, between Carter and Aiden, and between who I was and who I wanted to become. It was time to confront it all, to face the mess I'd been avoiding. No more excuses, no more running away. The next morning, I found Carter in the kitchen, pouring his coffee as the sunlight streamed through the window. He looked up when I entered, his face a mixture of surprise and cautious hope. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence stretching between us like a fragile thread. "We need to talk," I finally said, my voice trembling as I stood in the doorway. He set his mug down and turned to face me fully, his expression unreadable but attentive. "Okay," he said simply. "I'm listening." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me. My hands shook, but I steadied myself, determined to say what needed to be said. "I can't do this anymore," I began, my voice cracking. "The games, the pushing, the expectations. It's not who we are. Or at least it's not who I want us to be. I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not." Carter's brows furrowed, his posture stiffening as he absorbed my words. "I was just trying to help," he said after a moment, his voice low. "To give us something new. Something to hold on to." "I know," I replied, tears threatening to spill. "But you didn't stop to ask how I felt about it. You didn't ask if it was what I wanted. And it hurt, Carter. It made me feel like I didn't matter." His shoulders sagged, and a shadow of regret crossed his face. "You're right," he said softly. "I didn't. And I'm sorry for that. Truly." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. And for the first time in what felt like ages, I saw a glimmer of the man I had fallen in love with. It wasn't just an apology, it was an acknowledgement of my pain, of the cracks that had formed between us. "I need to rebuild this with you," I said, my voice breaking as tears streamed down my face. "But it has to be on our terms, not anyone else's. We can't keep pretending we're okay just to fit some idea of what a marriage should be." Carter stepped closer, his movements tentative but purposeful. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a hug that felt both familiar and new. "We'll figure it out," he whispered, his voice steady. "Together." In that moment, something shifted. It wasn't a grand resolution or a sudden fix to everything that was broken. But it was a start. A small, fragile step toward healing. As we stood there in each other's arms, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't the blazing fire we once had, but it was enough to light the way forward. Later that day, I realized there was one final conversation I needed to have. It wasn't just a loose end, it was a crucial step toward finding closure. This time, it was with Aiden. The thought lingered heavily in my mind as I debated whether reaching out was the right thing to do. My fingers hovered over my phone screen before I finally summoned the courage to text him. "Can we meet one last time?" I typed. The words feeling as heavy as the emotions I had been suppressing for days. After a brief pause, his reply came, a simple yes. We agreed to meet at the same quaint cafe where everything had started. The cafe had become more than a meeting place, it was the backdrop of so many pivotal moments. A stage for emotions that had become too big to contain. When I arrived, Aiden was already there, sitting at our usual table by the window. He looked up and smiled when he saw me, but his expression held a heaviness I hadn't seen before. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and the sadness behind them struck me like a silent plea. "I didn't think I'd hear from you again," he said softly as I slid into the chair across from him. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure how to begin. My heart pounded in my chest, a chaotic rhythm that mirrored the storm of emotions inside me. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Aiden," I began, my voice quieter than I intended. "I care about you. I really do. But this, whatever it is between us, it can't continue. It has to end." My words hung in the air like an unspoken truth finally given form. Aiden nodded slowly, his gaze never wavering from mine. He was calm, almost too calm, and it unnerved me. "I understand," he said, his voice steady but tinged with an unspoken hurt. "But can I ask you something?" "Of course," I replied, bracing myself. "Do you think you would have felt the same way if things were different? If the circumstances weren't what they are?" His question hit me like a freight train, each word digging into a part of me I wasn't ready to confront. The honest answer was one I didn't have. And maybe I never would. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on me. But I knew one thing for sure, no amount of speculation could change what was real and present. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. "But I can't live in what-ifs. Aiden, I have to focus on what's real. What's right. And right now. That means I have to let this go." He smiled softly, but the sadness in his expression deepened. "You're stronger than you realize," he said, his words carrying a bittersweet finality. As I stood and turned to leave, I felt an ache in my chest, a mix of relief and heartbreak. Every step away from the cafe felt heavier than the last. Letting go of Aiden wasn't easy, it was like tearing away a part of myself that I had grown to cherish. But it was necessary. A decision rooted in loyalty and the promises I had made. When I arrived home, Carter was there, waiting in the living room. He didn't ask where I'd been, and I didn't offer an explanation. It was as if we both understood that some things didn't need to be said aloud. Instead, I sat down beside him, our shoulders barely touching but connected in ways that words couldn't describe. We didn't speak much that evening, but in the quiet, there was an unspoken agreement. We were ready to rebuild what had been broken. It would take time, patience, and effort. But sitting there side by side, I felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were both willing to try. In the end, Carter and I decided to start anew. It wasn't an easy road, but we realized that true love isn't always perfect. It's about the commitment to face challenges together. We spent more time listening to and understanding each other instead of letting risky ideas shake the foundation of our marriage. As for Aiden, with all his charm and affection, he became a small chapter in my story, a reminder that every decision has consequences and not all temptations are worth the cost. I chose Carter. I chose our marriage. Because I understood that genuine love is not always dazzling. But it is valuable because of what we've built together. If you're facing difficulties in your relationship, remember that communication, empathy, and sincerity are the keys to overcoming any obstacle. Take the time to reflect on why you chose each other in the first place. And don't hesitate to seek outside help if needed. Temptations or struggles are often just tests for your love. Stay strong and committed. Before making any decision, ask yourself if it truly aligns with your values and the relationship you've built. Thank you for taking the time to follow this story. If you found this content meaningful or relatable, please hit like and share to spread it to others. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our upcoming emotional and life lesson-packed videos. See you in the next story.